Hey, Catherine. First of all, thank you for trying this whole image critique thing out with me. This is going to be kind of a trial run to see how it goes, see whether I can keep up with the amount that might potentially come in. So, thank you for being my guinea pig. I appreciate it. So taking a look at the images that you sent in, let's start off with the fountain shot. So honestly, the post processing is nice on this one. I like the amount of saturation in the sky. Everything feels pretty natural. Compositionally, I would argue that maybe we don't need quite as much sky. So, like the area above the fountain, maybe we could cut that perhaps in half because, when I'm thinking about composition and where to crop an image, I always try to crop just outside the area where the sky is the most interesting. So when the sky starts to get boring, I start thinking about cropping some of it out. And so because there's not as much color in the upper portion of the sky, I started to think that maybe we don't need it. So I would potentially bring down the top of the frame. So contrast wise, I feel like if we zoom in here, you can see how dark some of the shadow areas are getting here. And when you have like, interesting stonework or rock formations in a landscape, the textures and the details in there are a nice little thing to have in there. You don't need much of it. You don't need lots of shadow information. In fact, it would actually hurt the composition if you had too much because it would be distracting. But you don't want to throw it away either. And so by letting the black tones go all the way to black like we have, we're throwing away information. So what I recommend is opening those shadows, opening the black portions of the frame. And I don't know where your comfort level is with post-processing in Photoshop or with the whole luminosity mask thing, but one of the ways that I like to add contrast is using a luminosity mask. That way I can control where the contrast is going, because oftentimes we're trying to add contrast more to the midtones and the highlights, but the shadows, if we add too much contrast, we just throw them away. We lose our shadow information. So I would recommend doing a contrast adjustment, before we add contrast. But when we add our contrast adjustment, to do it through Lights 1 luminosity mask, and that'll restrict it to only go into the highlights and the midtones, but keep that contrast out of the shadows. One other little technical thing, if we zoom in kind of up in here, you see how we have the kind of cyan up here and then the magenta down here. We have chromatic aberration. That's really easy to get rid of. Just make sure that you go down to the lens corrections in Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw and select remove chromatic aberrations. In a contrasty scene like this is usually where they tend to show up. It looks like your lens has got a fair bit of chromatic aberration. So I'll take a look at that. So next image, Red Rocks, super hard place to shoot. I've been in that area. I've been to Valley of Fire, and I feel you for how difficult of a scene it is to shoot. So the very first technical thing here is I think that you said that you had bracketed this image. And I don't know if you mean for exposure bracketing or for focus stacking. But as we kind of zoom in and look around here, it's super soft. And I think what's happening, because it doesn't look like out of focus soft. It looks like either something's wrong with your lens, or more likely, when we blended those images together inside of Lightroom, it screwed up the sharpness. Because what happens if things aren't lined up perfectly, you get what's called ghosting, where all that movement in between all the different scenes kind of gets all averaged together and you lose your sharpness. So in a scene like this, honestly, there's no need to exposure bracket at all. I would just use a single frame because nothing is super dark, nothing is super bright. So you don't need to exposure bracket. And you're not super close to any foreground element, so there's not really a need to focus stack it either. So this could easily be just a single frame. And I would always avoid using Lightroom to blend stuff together. And so I agree with you. Like, you brought in a sky. If we look at this frame, you brought in another sky for a sky replacement. You did a great job with that, by the way. It looks very natural. You chose a realistic looking one that, isn't going to look super phony. And I don't think that it only helps the scene. But compositionally, I see what you were saying about how it doesn't really tell a story, and there's not really any kind of visual path. There's not really any kind of object that is drawing the eye more than any other object. There's not like a focal point for the image. It's just a composition to me that sadly just doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because there's no visual path. There's no like subject or main object for the eye to be gravitated towards. I would say that, if looking at this scene, perhaps what we're most drawn to are those interesting layers in that distant background. Perhaps a nice telephoto image of, just 400 millimeters of this background area back here, could potentially be a slightly better composition. But even then, I'm not entirely sure. Sometimes it's beautiful to our eyes, but there's just not a great way to compose it. And in this particular scene, I see why you wanted to take a photo here. It's beautiful. It's that nice deserty scene, but I can't see a composition in there. Like, I don't know what I would shoot. I would probably look at it, appreciate it, and then probably not get my camera out, unfortunately. But the main thing to learn from this image, though, is, especially if we look down into this corner here, you see all of that softness. I'm positive that is just Lightroom not knowing what to do with the images that you gave it. And what it did was average all those images that were slightly out of alignment. Maybe it was a breezy day and your tripod blew around. Maybe there was a slight bit of jostling in between frames, or maybe it was just, I don't know. But whatever it is, Lightroom screwed up the blend. So no need to exposure bracket it. No need to focus stack it. You did a great job on the exposure blend, or the bringing in the sky. But yeah, learning when you need to exposure bracket.
1 sec.
Siri is trying to talk to me. Learning when to focus stack, learning when to exposure bracket. I think that's the piece of learning that you can take away from this shot.
Something went wrong. Please try again.
Siri is messing with me. So yeah, hopefully this is useful. I look forward to the next time you send me images. Maybe let's try to see what you can get done from a single image, and see if you can really take control over where you're adding your contrast. Don't just add contrast globally to the whole image. Add it to either the areas or just the tones, ideally, that are going to benefit the most from it. Try not to block up those shadows like we did in this fountain scene, because I really like the way the highlight area portions of this image looks. I just don't necessarily love all of the extra contrast going into the shadow areas. All right. Hopefully this has helped. If you have any specific questions, make sure to ask them. And yeah, we'll see you in the next little critique. Thank you so much for being my guinea pig. Hopefully this helps.